anyone there? Now then, this is Orkney.
Hello.
You're down in Sheffield. Yeah, I think he's from Sheffield, isn't he?
Hello, yeah, it cuts it out for a minute, but I've got you back.
I think we're the only ones here at the moment.
Oh, right, we're not connected with the main one then yet.
Microphone on. There we go. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
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 At the end of the table in Orkney. Hello, Josie.
In charge of ourselves.
We can't hear you in Orkney. I think your mute must be on now.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Hello.
Hello, Susan. Can't hear you either.
Oh, I can hear you.
I can hear Susan.
Oh,
I can hear everyone.
What's going on now? Don't tell me it's chaos all over
We
again.
can hear everyone.
Hey.
Hello. Hello.
Right, Orkney, give us a wave.
Yeah.
Hello, Orkney.
Okay, so you can hear us. That's fine. Hello there. Josie?
I'm Unst. Oh, Josie, you've been mentioned. No, I'm Alison.
We seem to have the presentation screen. We've got two.
Okay. Well, if folk would like to say something, it would be good. Otherwise, it's going to be...
Oh,
Now.
I did
Please
press
don't
it.
do
I
that.
didn't press it.
You've pressed the button which puts your presentation on. And I'm doing the presentation tonight.
Yeah.
So whoever pressed the presentation, unpress it, please.
It's not Unst.
There, well, there's my presentation. That's the one you should be seeing.
it's not me.
I can see nothing. Oh, hello,
No.
Orkney.
Control.
Hello.
Hello. Can anybody see me?
Hello, hello, Susan. I can see you.
Oh.
We can't hear anybody.
Ah. I can't hear anybody either. It's all gone. Oh, back it comes. There's
Maybe the television needs turned up. Huh?
Well, we can hear everyone.
Right, that's better now. Yep.
Can you hear me on Unst?
Hello
Yes.
there. Hi
Yes.
there.
Hi, Cam.
Hello.
Hello there.
Hello.
Nice to see you for the first time.
Everything's
And hello,
frozen
Susan.
now.
Hello. Hi. I think it's working.
Hello.
No.
Hello. Hello, hello.
Yes, hello, Unst. We can hear you.
Come in.
Come in,
Eric.
Unst.
Come in, anybody?
Hello.
Right, Orkney, if you turn your microphone off now,
What's that there? Oh, that's to make it bigger, was it? Don't any bigger.
and Susan, if you turn your microphone off now,
What's that little?
that should just leave, well, Tom, if you turn yours off as well, and that should just leave Unst, who might be able to listen to us now.
Oh, yes.
Or not. Hang on.
Volume's on. Volume on. Hello. Everything's
Hello, Ernst.
frozen, if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Wait a minute.
I wouldn't even see you waving if you waved. Little red lights on, though. Camera. Try.
Stop speaking. Wait a minute. That's the trouble of doing it like that. During the day, Video Master, VC Master's there
Okay.
with 3 people in the office
No.
sorting things out.
Yeah.
This is Josie sorting it out in Unst, apparently. They've frozen now. Okay. That's fine. Okay, if Unst is frozen.
Hello.
Hello, Unst.
Hello.
Hello. There we go. Yes. Hi
Yes.
there.
You
Very good.
froze.
Yeah, it might happen again. So if it does, just hang on, and hopefully it'll come back. So
Right.
it's nice to see you for the first time. That's great. It's good that we're actually connecting with Unst. That's good. So the way we work this is, if you want to say something, turn your microphone on and then speak. If you're not wanting to say anything at that point, turn your microphone off, so that we don't have any interference between the different computers and different VC they've got different cameras. So if you want to say something, stick your microphone on and ask. And if you haven't got anything to say at that point, just turn it off, and then hopefully all will be well. So we seem to have a full complement today. So maybe in the last evening, things might go sort of to plan, which is a first. So, but then that's what happens. These things are sent to try us. So tonight, our last evening in this short introduction to the Vikings in the Northern Isles, there's a few things I'd like to look at. I'd like to do some place names. Now, place names is a huge subject, so I'll just do a little bit, and then we can maybe have a wee chat about that. I want to look at what we didn't finish last week, which is some of the other intangible culture of the Vikings in the Northern Isles, which is the stories. Now, I don't know about folk here, but myself, one of the first aspects of Viking culture that I was introduced to and that I enjoyed was listening to the stories, or reading the stories about the Norse gods and the adventures of the Viking heroes. And I'm sure that's the case with a lot of people. And generally these are associated with Iceland, but luckily we have a few poems from 12th and 13th century Orkney which show that the same legendary material and the same heroes were known in Orkney as well at the height of the Jarldom. And we can be pretty sure if they were known in Orkney, they'd be known in Shetland as well. So it gives us an insight into this intangible storytelling culture of the Norse. And if we have time at the end, I want to show you a little bit of what I've been doing on a sabbatical that I'm supposed to have had at the end of last semester, which is looking at some unusual Viking sites around the coast of Shetland. So there's a few things, just to sort of show the breadth of types of material that we can delve into when we're looking at the Vikings in the Northern Isles. We've done a lot of material culture and a lot of, I don't know what you would call it, but discussion about what the Vikings were like. I thought it would be quite good now to have a look at some of the other aspects. So, what I've got on the screen at the moment is a KML file. I like working with KML files. That's a file that you can show on Google Earth, so you can make maps of stuff. And this is a map of place names, a certain type of place name. I'll just take this one off first, so there's no... let's have a look. There we go. Yes, there we go. This is a map of a type of place name. Place name studies has been going for around 100 or so years, and it was particularly strong in the Scandinavian countries. There were some very good scholars in the late 19th century who kind of created the study of place names as a resource for historians. A chap called Olaf Rygg did a study of all the farm names in Norway and worked out what they all meant and worked out some of the basic theories behind how you take a name today and you work out what it was originally and how settlement took place in Norway. And from Olaf Rygg and Jakob Jakobsen, who came to Shetland from the Faroe Islands, there's been a lot of Scandinavians involved in developing place name studies, which is called onomastics. By the way, for those who like... Onomastics. Those who like... O-N-O-M-A-S-T-I-C-S. Onomastic. Is that right? Onomastics. The study of names. There have been great scholars in Scotland and great scholars in England as well of place names, but the Scandinavians were sort of instrumental in starting the whole thing off. And one of the ways of studying a place name is to divide it into two bits. Certainly when it comes to Scandinavian place names, you get the generic, which is the kind of the common sort of part of the name, like let's think of an English example, stead. You know, so you had anything with stead in the end. The stead is the generic, and the thing you stick in front of it, big stead, you know, muddy stead, Woodstead, whatever, don't think these names exist, but they might. That is a specific. So place names tend to be a combination of the two. There's the term that's general, the generic, and then there's the specific that identifies the particular place. So what we have here is a map of one particular generic in place. Yes, Vista. Now, I'm hoping that the picture is coming up on the screens out there, so that I don't have to turn the screen as I did last week. So I'm hoping you're seeing this. And we're going to do place names now. But I just wanted to show you this map because this is a pretty clear indication of the most heavily settled parts of Scotland and the surrounding islands during the Norse period. And this comes out in different ways, but the original generic is Bolstadr, which means a sort of divided farm. And as you can see, we get lots of examples in Shetland. Lots of examples in Orkney, Caithness, one or two in Sutherland, and quite a lot in the Upper Hebrides as well, with a few in Skye, down the coast, a couple in Mull, and a lot in Islay. One of the things this shows is the cultural sort of connections around the coast of Scotland. That we mustn't think of the Northern Isles, but they're special, obviously, and each archipelago is unique in many ways, but they're also part of a bigger picture. They're not completely different from the other islands around Scotland. During the Norse period, they formed a cultural continuum from the north of Shetland all the way down to Islay, and this shows very well. This particular Bolstadr idea of type of farm existed in this whole area, and I'm not sure if I've got another example here. Excuse me, I'm going to be coughing a wee bit. I've got a bit of a cough.
See all these Bolston names, all these names, ties into this land thing again, it's farming names.
Yes. Mm-hmm. It does. Why?
Buster's similar, really. Is that you haven't added the ER, Buster? Buster.
Yes. Well, the thing is, it's generally believed that all these different forms, Bister, Busta, Bist, Bister, Bust, Bus, are all from the same generic. It's just that in different areas the name changed a little bit differently. So, for example, in the Gaelic areas, once Gaelic settlement happened and people changed from speaking Norse to speaking Gaelic, the Bolstadr bit, it just retained the sort of bo bit, the bust, and lost the stadr bit at the end. Whereas in those areas where Norse went from Norse to Scots in its different forms, then you get a different bit, it's different pronunciation.
What about setter?
Setter is a different word. Setter is, well, there's two suggestions for setter, and both probably both occur, and that's setter, which means a farm, and satyr, which means a shilling, or a sort of secondary settlement in the kind of wilder parts of the farm settlement. So we'll come back to that just in a little while. But the point I just want to make is that the Northern Isles are not oddly unique in this. They're part of the bigger Norse world around Scotland. And the strange thing is, there are no Bolstadr names in the Isle of Man, Ireland, or England. So it's a particularly Scottish Norse generic and a Norwegian one. These are Norwegian bullstathers. And you can see the area where the greatest concentration of bullstathers is. So you can almost see the movement and implanting of one culture from Norway into the landscapes and the islands around Scotland with these names. Okay. And one other thing that could be said, the Scottish ones are far more varied when it comes to the specific than the Norwegian ones. And no one's explained that really. In Norway you get lots and lots of Myklebust, big bullstather. That seems to be the most common specific. Myklebust, you don't really get much in Scotland at all, but you do get lots of other specifics added to it. So it's as if bullstather as a type of farm and a concept was brought across from Norway to the Viking settlements around Scotland, and then it sort of developed a bit. So that the names became more varied and more interesting, and more variety. You get Helgebust in Norway as well, which means a holy bullstather, and you get that in Scotland. You get Helebust. Where are we? Where's it gone? I saw it a minute ago. Somewhere a bit. Lost it. Ah, there it is. Helebust. There we go. Which is one of the ones in South Uist. So, and why it's a holy bullstather is one of these questions that still hasn't been answered. But we get a much more variety of these in Scotland. So, with that, just to introduce place names, I think we'll have a little bit more a closer look at it, and then we'll come back to the bullstathers and other names in a few minutes. So, let's see, where are we then? And then we'll go on to the Lost Legends shortly. Now, I'll put it here somewhere. Where did I put it? Just talk amongst yourselves just for a second. Think up some awkward questions to ask me.
You need to declutter your desktop.
Yeah, well, that is decluttered, actually. Yeah. Tell you what, I will...
Have all that in subfolder.
Just a wee second. I'll have to put it on the desktop itself. I'll back in a minute.
Have you got a folk at the museum?
What I thought this morning.
400?
What happened to you yesterday afternoon? Katrina was asking very well.
I was playing cricket.
Playing cricket, did you say?
Yeah.
Inside, I know.
Inside.
Aye.
Well, the whole rest of the world was there. You were the only person.
Needed me to play.
Hello, this is Aunt. Can you hear me?
We can
Hello.
hear you.
Oh, hello.
Yes.
I thought I'd join in with the general chatter now that
Yes, we've
I see.
lost our lecturer.
teacher's
That's
left.
gone.
Teacher's left the room. He's gone.
Yeah.
He accused his desktop of being cluttered and
So
he's
he's-
walked out. So.
No, I
He's
don't
still got
know.
his coffee.
Is that what that's true. That is true. Oh, he's caught us.
Hey,
There we go. So, some place names now. Right, you get the benefit of something else here. This is part of a lecture that I give regularly to students on the Scottish Cultural Studies, BA. And I do place names as a sort of introduction to Scottish culture. And one of the aspects of culture that they're interested in is place names. So I tell them about the Celtic place names of Scotland, spend a good 2 hours talking about that, and then we move on to the Germanic place names. So, I'll give you a quick little bit. We'll go through it. Since it's there, why not? Now, we've been talking about the ancestors of the Vikings. And the ancestors of the Vikings were Germanic people, which were related to other Germanic people in and around the Baltic Sea and the North Sea. And, of course, it's not just the Vikings that we have in the British Isles that have brought Germanic culture and the place names over. There were also the people that preceded the Vikings who lived in Denmark and the north of Germany. So, again, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but it's just to show that the Vikings themselves were following a well-trodden path. Apart from the fact that they came directly across from Norway, which wasn't a well-trodden path, but they were still following Germanic peoples coming into the British Isles. So, and some of these Germanic peoples that came to the British Isles didn't come to the Northern Isles, unfortunately, but they did come to east coast of England and ultimately to the southern part of Scotland, came from the same, well, at least part of the same area that the later Vikings came from. The Danes that went to England. So, just a little bit of extra information thrown in here. The three peoples that are mentioned by Bede as forming the Anglo-Saxons, we can actually place them in North Germany and Denmark. We have the Saxons there, south of the Eider. We have the Angles. This area was known as Angeln, and it was known as Angeln in the Norse Viking period as well, which takes us up to, which includes Hedeby, actually, which was the great Viking town, the biggest Viking town. So the predecessors of the Vikings there were the Angles, who settled in East Anglia and Northumbria and Mercia in England. And then the northern part
Oh, hello.
were the Jutes. Hello.
I lost you for several minutes.
You've come back,
I've
that's
missed,
good.
Yes, I've missed the beginning of your Anglian bit.
My Anglian ramble. Just to say that the later Vikings, some of them, certainly the ones that came to England, had been preceded by by people about 150 to 200 years before. The Angles, who settled East Anglia, Northumbria, and Mercia, and also in southern Scotland, and then the Jutes from the northern part of Jutland. The place name maintains their identity there. That's the other interesting thing about place names. We can use them for historical purposes as sources because they contain interesting and useful pieces of information. And the Jutes are supposed to have settled in Kent, in England. Okay, what are we doing? Right, so there we are. Again, this is just extra. This is not the Vikings, but I suppose it's a comparative example. When the Vikings came to the Northern Isles, they were pagan, and we have one or two names in Orkney and Shetland which suggest pagan religion. We'll come to those soon. But when the Angles and Saxons came to England from the mid-5th century onwards, they were also pagans. And they worshipped the same gods. So, I'm sure you know this already, but Woden is the god of war, is the same person as Odin, the Norse god of war and king of the dead, and taking warriors to Valhall when they die. It's the same figure. And in fact, the W at the end, the W has fallen off with Odin. But in actual fact, in some parts of Jutland, they maintain the W in front of a lot of words that we have in English, but they don't have in other Scandinavian languages, but they've maintained it in Jutland. So, these things continue. And anyway, this is right in the borders, just across the border into Scotland from England, on Deer Street, actually, and it's called Woden's Law. So,
what is that?
It's a fort. It's an Iron Age fort with Roman siege work, practice siege works around it, actually, and this old name.
Sorry, I missed the name. You disappeared for a few seconds. Can you repeat the name again,
Yeah,
please?
Woden's Law. Woden's Law.
Oh, right, that's the name of that lovely place.
That's the name of that place, yeah. And what we find, in fact, is that Woden, his name it's rarely, this doesn't occur very often, but when it is attached to anything, it tends to be attached to prehistoric things that people believed were of a warlike origin. So, in fact, you all have heard of Antonine's Wall. Well, Antonine's Wall is also known as Grim's Dyke. And Grim is a nickname for Woden, and it's also a nickname for Odin, Grimur, the masked, the hidden one. So when you, in Old Norse poetry, it's often used as a kenning or a metaphor for Odin. So the same things are sort of turning up. And it brings us back to this question about how different were the Vikings from the Anglo-Saxons. Not a lot. You're just talking a couple of hundred years of development.
Where exactly is that for the beginning?
Yeah, it's... I'm just trying to think exactly how you get there. I'll point out in the map to you.
What county?
Oh, it's in Berwickshire.
Berwickshire.
Yeah.
That's Scotland.
Yeah, it's in Scotland, yeah.
Yes, I thought so.
No, it's Scotland. It's just over the border into Scotland. Yeah. So you get this extra little bit. And some extra place name generics here. Early ones from the Germanic settlement in the north of England and in southern Scotland. And these are very old. These go back to the beginning of settlement. Probably 6th century, thereabouts. So there were people speaking a Germanic language in Scotland, well, what's now Scotland, it wasn't Scotland then, but in what is now Scotland, a couple of hundred years before the Vikings appeared. And also, at about the same time as Gaelic was coming in to what's now Scotland. So Scotland has had both Germanic and Gaelic languages and place names from virtually the same time all the way back to the 6th century. So if you hear people saying Scotland is a Celtic country, in some ways yes, in other ways no. This is equally a Germanic country, Germanic culture as well. So okay, we'll just weave through these. We don't want to complicate things unduly. It's more just for your general edification. I suppose there's one thing, though, that's worth noticing. These are other generics here. So we do have some hams in Scotland. We think of that as the quintessential English sort of farm name. But we have them in the borders as well. But from the perspective of looking at Norse place names, in southern Scotland we have some Wick names. Now these Wick names are not the same as Wick names in Orkney, Shetland and Caithness. It's a different origin. So when you see Berwick, it's not a Norse place name. It's actually an Anglo-Saxon one, Berwick. And a wick, or witch, in the south of England, was a dependent farm. Now, you may think, oh well, so what? But just in case you think Berwick is a Norse place name, it's not. It does actually turn up in Orkney and Saga, though, and I think it's been, the Norse assumed it was a Norse name, and sort of put Vik instead of a Wick on the end of it. However, these names here, as you can see, that are in Ayrshire, one or two of those, it's possible that one of them might be a Norse place name, but it's difficult to be sure about that. But generally, if it's a Wick in the north or the west coast, it's Norse. If it's Wick in the borders in southern Scotland, it's a dependent farm. It's a different word.
So you mean a wick is a vic?
Yes. It's just that Vik in Old Norse has tended to come out as Wick in this. Okay. And we'll come to those in a wee minute. Just to avoid any confusion. Or maybe I've added to confusion. Well, there we go. These things happen. Okay, so we've had a very quick whee over Anglo-Saxon. We'll call them Anglian names, actually, because there's not a lot of evidence of Saxons as such in what's now Scotland, but Angles, definitely. So we've got them in the south, in being very much spreading their settlement. The language is spreading. The language that's ultimately to become Scots is spreading in the south. And in the north, we have the arrival of the Norse and their impact on the nomenclature of the north. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so Norse place names have been mapped. They've been mapped in Scotland, Ireland, and England, so we're quite sure where the greatest concentration of Norse place names. And for Norse, I'm also including Danish. Okay, so we're talking Scandinavian as a whole. So, and we can see from this map the areas with the densest number of Scandinavian place names. The thing is, it's Sideland, as far as I own, it's only because part of the talk that I normally give when I'm talking to the students is I'm putting the Viking raids into context. Now, Norse place names have been, as I say, very well studied, and we're now able to zone them, so we're able to sort of split them up. So although you have Scandinavian place names in all these areas, they're not all the same. They differ in many ways. So the ones in England, say in in the Danelaw in Yorkshire, are quite distinct from the ones in the west. Their bu is the most common ending for a farm, be, and you don't get Bolstader. So you get these. There are, if you like, place name dialects in the settlement areas, and that's partly to do with the fact of where people came from to settle in these areas. So you get an absolute match between the be place names in England and the bu place names in Denmark. It's a very, very common ending in Denmark for farms, so that you get that. And as we've already seen, we get Bolstader names in Scotland, and you get them in Norway. So you can see some evidence there of the origins of the settlers. So we've got these different zones, and for our purposes, we'll just have a quick. I'll tell you a little bit about zones 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are the different zones of place names, Scandinavian place names in Scotland. Tickly throat. Sorry about that. Right. Now, zone 1, where we are, is Orkney, Shetland, and Caithness. And this is the zone that has the heaviest density of Scandinavian place names, not just in Scotland, but in the British Isles. So there's far more Scandinavian place names in Zone 1 than there is in the Danelaw, for example. It's a far more Scandinavian landscape. In fact, whereas in the Danelaw, which in some parishes you might get up to about 40% of the names, settlement names being Scandinavian, in Zone 1, and the rest of the names are sort of Anglian, in Zone 1, where we are, it's completely Scandinavian, the original stratum of place names. It's a very odd situation, but say if we think of Shetland, for example, we have Unst, Yell, and Fetlar, which might be pre-Norse names, and that's it. And even Unst, Yell, and Fetlar, well, Unst, for example, is potentially a very, very old Norse place name, because there are a lot of island names in Norway that end in st. But the reason for thinking that they're pre-Norse is that they're very odd names for islands to have. generally in the Norse world, islands have a or I at the end, and we have a lot of them. But that's generally what you get. You generally get that in islands around the coast of Norway as well. So it's very odd to have 3 island names that don't have that, and that are not obviously translatable either. So most Norse names, unless they're very, very old in Scandinavia, are kind of apparent what they mean, you know. But these, they look odd and they stand out. Although they have been given a kind of a Norse patina. So Yala, the old version, the old form of yell, looks like a Norse word for sort of yelling, and Fetlar comes out in an Old Norse source as Fetlur, which looks like the word for a kind of band that you put round something. But that doesn't mean much when it comes to an island. So it looks as if what the Norse have done to those 3 names is they've borrowed them and then they've kind of massaged them a bit. And the Norse did that quite often with place names. We know that they took, say, the name the Loire in France, and they didn't just borrow it as Loire, they turned it into Leirau in Old Norse, which means the muddy river. So, and they did this quite a bit. So they seem to have done those to these 3 island names, which might suggest initial contact. So, or at least some kind of contact, some kind of awareness before the Viking Age started, that they knew that these places were out there. Orkney, the name Orkney itself also is an older name. It goes back to the Roman period, but it's given a Norse Eyjar ending. But the Orkades were known all the way back into the classical world. So these are Orkney, Unstjälm, Fetlar, and possibly Hjaltland, Shetland itself, are names that the Norse may have borrowed. But when they came to living in the place, both Orkney and Shetland, and settling, they didn't borrow names. And no names survived around. So it wasn't as if they came into the place and sort of elbowed folk, I'm going to put my farm between your 2 Pictish named farms and call it such and such. That doesn't seem to have happened. There's a total renaming of the landscape, which is a mysterious thing to happen.
What does that indicate? Is that too much of a conjecture?
Well, when the Scandinavians moved to other places, they borrowed names, they changed names, they sort of massaged names, or they settled, and the older names survived around about. For one thing, it shows that the languages that were spoken there, or the language that was spoken there prior to the Viking arrival, disappeared. But it also shows that there's a total disregard for the names that were there before, which either means that there was no contact, which seems unlikely, or that the people who had these earlier names were totally disregarded. So the fact that they'd named everything was irrelevant to the Vikings coming in, because either they were...
Hello.
Oh. Hi.
No, they could just have renamed places from their old names, but into their own language, surely.
That might have happened, but not. It's never happened in other places to the same extent that you get a complete replacement of place names. As it didn't happen in the Danelaw, didn't happen in Cumbria, in the area of the south, the southern Hebrides, you get 1 or 2 names surviving. Generally, translating names, it can happen. You're absolutely right, but it doesn't happen to a great extent. Think of all the names that are borrowed when the Europeans went and settled in North America. They borrowed names because it's easier just to borrow a name. If you hear, what's that called? Mississippi. Okay, that's Mississippi. Can't spell it, that's Mississippi. There's so many names have survived from this initial contact and borrowing. Even in Australia, when you think of what happened to the Aborigines, a large number of names were borrowed. The one place in Australia where names weren't borrowed was Tasmania, where we know that was a total destruction of the original inhabitants of Tasmania. So, yes, indeed, some names could be borrowed. One that could be, and I think this is a possibility, and that's Dunrossness, which, for those who don't know, is the southern point of Shetland, and in Old Norse, in the Orkneyinga saga, it comes out as Dyn Rastarnes, and the Dyn Rust is the roost, terrible bit of water south of Shetland that you hit when you're coming up from Orkney. And in Old Norse, Dyn Rust means the noisy rust, the noisy sort of channel of water, what's the word?
Roaring. I read somewhere. Headland and the roaring tide wave.
Yeah, the dune bit is the noise of the roar, and the rust is the tide. Yeah, but it's a strange name to give to a ness, which had a fort on it. There's lots of pre-Norse architecture in that area.
And the Scottish name for Brock was Dun.
Exactly.
That was my argument. I thought, was it not named after the fact that there was a few duns around?
It's possible. It's possible.
Rather, it's the noise, dun. And
It's
then there's two interpretations on that word dun then, obviously.
Yeah, well, the thing is, as it appears in the Orkneyinga saga, it's Dyn Rust, or Dyn Rastarnes, which does definitely mean the noisy water ness. But you can't hear as far as I'm aware, you can't hear the roost from Dunrossness. So that looks like what Susan suggested, a sort of, well, it's not a translation into Norse, but it's like this turning the Loire into Leirau. So it's a kind of a borrowing sort of, and then a changing to make it sense, to give it a meaning in Old Norse. But of course, if you think Dun Ross, that itself is a very nice Celtic name, because not only is it Dun is the Gaelic form, but Dyn is the Welsh form and probably the Pictish form for Dun, for a fort.
For a fort,
Yeah, and a Ross is it's slightly different in Gaelic and in Old Welsh or Pictish, but it means a sort of it can either mean a sort of a headland, or it can mean a kind of what's the word? It's a wilderness sort of bit. So it's entirely possible that there was a Pictish Dun Ross there that got converted into Old Norse. But it's not a translation as such, it's a kind of a change. It doesn't mean the same, but they've taken the name and turned it into a Norse name. The only problem is that we don't have any others of those. You might hope that if that was a common thing for the Norse to do in Shetland, you might get a few others that you could recognise.
Yeah, when in the Western Isles, in Skye, for instance, a friend stays near Dunvegan. Well, it's not Dun, it's north of Dunvegan. I'm trying to remember the name. Waternish.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And there's a Dun right at the back of their house, a big fortress.
Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, well, that, of course, Dun has gone back into Shetland, into Skye, because it's become a Gaelic-speaking area.
And their house area is called Dunhallan.
Right. It's a bonny area. I've been up there.
It's a lovely area.
Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah. So, it's possible that some of the names were translated. It's possible that some of the names were amended, but we'd hope to see more of them if that was a common thing to have happened. And it's unlikely that would have happened to every single name. You would still get some that had been borrowed, because it's a bore to try to rename everything. And it's not necessarily to translate. It's easy to borrow a name. For example, in Zone 2, where we have a lot of Norse names, those Norse names have come to us through Gaelic. So when people changed from speaking Norse to speaking Gaelic, they didn't translate all the names into Gaelic place names. They just kept the name and just changed the pronunciation a bit. So similarly, if the population of Shetland, for example, had, say, been Pictish and just changed language to become Norse, they would have just maintained their place names. They wouldn't have translated them.
Yeah, they wouldn't have bothered.
No, because a name works as you don't have to know the meaning of a name for a name to work as a name. Scotland's a good example of that. How many know the meaning of the place names, of the normal place names of Scotland? Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen. Most people don't, but they work as names. So when the language changes, the name can continue. Similarly, that's what's happened in the Northern Isles. People have changed from speaking Norse to speaking Scots, but they've just maintained the names. They haven't bothered to translate them. So, yeah, so there we go. So it might have happened on occasion, but it's unlikely to have happened to such an extent. And it is odd that you get this complete stratum of Norse place names in Zone 1. And what it's like the same place names and the same extent of place names as you get in the Faroe Islands and you get in Iceland. Faroe Islands and Iceland were effectively uninhabited when the Norse arrived there. So that's what it's like when you look at the place names of Zone 1. And it's as if it was being treated as uninhabited when the names were being created.
So it really kind of sets the imagination going about how they colonised it. What on earth went on that they...
It does. And
they obliterated the British.
Well, of course, there's arguments that they didn't, but they certainly had no desire to adopt any of the culture and linguistic material that was around. So, and that led scholars in the past, like the Norwegian historian Brugger, to believe that Orkney and Shetland were empty when the Norwegian settlers arrived, because they couldn't explain what had happened to the place names. But of course, archaeologists don't like what onomasticians have to say to them. They say, oh, place names can be this, place names can be that. But in fact, there are pretty good examples of from other places about what happens when new people come in to an area, and usually there is some crossover and borrowing. So it's an oddity.
Is there no Pictish names here at all? Not even.
Nothing that is provable. Now, Jakob Jakobsen, in his first study of place names in Shetland, thought there was none. And then he must have read a few books and took cold feet and identified a few generics that he said were Celtic. And they're really not convincing. What he's done is he went to sort of a Welsh dictionary and picked a few words, and they don't fit as place names. So the general feeling amongst place name scholars now is no, there aren't, unless a very good case can be made. So, and the same situation exists in the Outer Hebrides too. There's it's very, very difficult to prove that there are any older place names in the Outer Hebrides than the Norse ones, because the Norse ones seem to form the basis, the bedrock, if you like, that other names are built upon. So, let's have a look. Well, actually, just before there we go. There's some examples of some types of place names from the Northern Isles. You can divide them into two types: topographical names and settlement names. But of course, that's a bit simplistic. There are also topographical settlement names, which we'll come to just in a little minute. But the way that names are sort of put into different categories, you get names for topographical features, and you get names for farms. That's the kind of, or some kind of settlement. Ignoring the fact that sometimes the oldest and most important farm in any given area is called after the salient topographical feature in that place. But you do get these two. So you've got Bursay, Björgisey, the fort island in in Orkney. Twat, both in Shetland and in Orkney, from Thwaite. So that's these are topographical names. Although they're a bit odd, has to be said, but it suggests that there was more brushwood in the Northern Isles when these names were created. And then we have Scale. We've talked about the Scowley already. So that's a settlement name. And Meldy, so that's a Bu name. There's generally a slight distinction made between B names in the Northern Isles and B names in the Danelaw. It suggested that the ones in the Northern Isles come from Bur, which is a related word, but probably means a bigger kind of farm. So it's related to Bu, but comes from the Norwegian side rather than the Danish one. And then you get Stader, which gives us Sta, so Weathersta, Vidars farm, and then we have Bolstader. So these are Stader and Bolstader are the most common farm names, settlement names in the Northern Isles. Bur is less common, but you do get it in Orkney and you do get it in Shetland as well. Now, let's see, why was I saying that? Oh yeah, okay. But we also get, in the Northern Isles, we get island names, a lot of those ending in A. I mentioned those already. That's the normal thing to call an island in the Northern Isles, to add A or Ui after it. And they're usually not too difficult to work out what they mean either. Sort of Laxey, Salmon Island. And then we have Vik names, which have given us Lerwick and Sandwick, and the dialect word Wick, which means, has come down to us from Old Norse. Okay. We don't need some. These are old names, Heimur and Veen. We'll leave those for the minute. Okay, just to put it into context, and just to show how the Northern Isles are part of this bigger continuum of names in Scotland. As I say, the Outer Hebrides really could go with Caithness, Orkney and Shetland as places that the oldest stratum of names are Norse. So the odd thing in the Outer Hebrides is it's the sort of the centre of the homeland of Gaelic today. And long may that continue. But Gaelic came into the Outer Hebrides, it would seem. There's no absolute proof that Gaelic was spoken in the Outer Hebrides before the Norse were there. It's possible, but it's not provable from the place names. There's been a lot of work done on the place names of Carloway in Lewis, and by Richard Cox, who's a professor at Salmore Rustic, and he has identified some old Gaelic place names, but he can't prove that they're older than the Norse names. You can only sort of hint they might be, but they're just as likely to be evidence of Gaelic coming into the Outer Hebrides, maybe around the year 1050 or something of that sort. So Gallicisation. So the Outer Hebrides are Gallicised, and the oldest stratum that you can prove is Norse. So again, it's the same sort of thing. Apart from, same as Unstia and Thekla, we have one or two of these bigger names that must have been borrowed at the initial contact, like Lewis, Uist. Well, that's about it, yeah? Lewis and Uist. The other names are all Norse. So when the people, they might have initially sailed past, got sort of contacted the people and said, what's this place called? They said, Lewis, okay, and then they've gone away again. But when they came back to settle, they didn't borrow any of the names. And Lewis, in fact, is similar to Unstia and Thekla in that it has an Old Norse form, Ljóðhús, in the Njál saga, it's mentioned, and also in Orkneyinga saga, and that looks like a Norse name, Ljóðhús, until you sort of translate it and think it's a very strange name for an island. It means people house or song house. So again, it's an illogical name. So it seems to be a Norse massaging of an earlier name. Yeah. And also, Uist is Ivist in Old Norse, which means a sort of outer house. Again, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So they may have borrowed these, but all the other names are Norse. And the same names turn up that you find in Orkney and Shetland. And oddly, actually, some of them have changed by going through Gaelic. But in other ways, sometimes the Old Norse has been preserved in the Gaelic. So we have in Lewis, Loch, obviously a Gaelic word, Lachsavat and Loch Langavat. And Lachsavat is the lax salmon water, vatten, and Langavat is the long water. So what's happened here is you've got the Norse name of the place, and then the Gaelic generic has been stuck in front. And that's why you can see that the Norse is older than the Gaelic, because the name is there, and then a Gaelic bit has been added on to it to Galicize it. So it's an oddity, but I think it's important. Sometimes I've found that the archipelagos around Scotland don't talk to each other as if they're sort of hermetically sealed. They're sort of different, they speak Gaelic over there, we speak Norse, we're Vikings and they're Celts. But in actual fact, historically, culturally, at least when you go back to this era, the same origin, the same roots. It's just the subsequent history has changed. There's a Bolstadder there, Tabust from Lewis. And to go along with Bolstadder, as evidence of a Norwegian connection, another generic that turns up that we have in the Northern Isles, which is of Norwegian origin rather than Danish or anything else, is Tingwall. The Thingvellir in Iceland, Tingwall in Shetland, there's a Tingwall in Orkney, and then there's Dingwall, and there's also the Tinwald, and there's a Tinwald in Dumfriesshire as well. All of these come from the assembly field, and it's in Norway that you get Thingwall. There's a Tingvoll rather in Norway, and several of them. So that's a direct Norwegian cultural borrowing, if you like. You don't get that particular structure in Danish. It's slightly different. You get the thing, but you don't get the associated with the field. Sometimes it's associated with a hill, but it's very irregular, and you don't get many examples in England at all. The place that you do get one is in this peninsula here that sticks out from Liverpool. It's called the Wirral. That's one. It's got a Tingwall name, and that again is connected to the fact that it was Vikings from Dublin that settled there around 900, just after 900, and it's part of that, the fact that they were of Norwegian cultural origin. So you get that, but it's an interesting one. So it's again this sort of connection across from Norway down and across the Atlantic as well. Okay, so while we're on that particular aspect, tickle. The place names of Orkney and Shetland, well, I've just shown, have similarities or connections to the Hebrides. We've seen some examples of that. But of course, the names are also common names. So you've got the same generics turning up all over the Viking world, at least the Norwegian Viking world, if we put it that way. The same names, which show the cultural heritage and the cultural connections. And it's very easy to draw up pictures of the different places with the same name. So what we've got here is Kvarf. Kvarf, yeah. That's interesting. I'm not you'll be able to put me right in this. I know in some Shetland dialects you get the kv sound as well. That's been preserved. Is it Walser? Something you sometimes hear in what would standard English be wh. Well, actually, it's already gone to standard English, but WH is pronounced with a kv sound.
Funny up there.
Well, that's a preservation actually of Old Norse, because the H, W, H, V combination is pronounced kv. So anyway, kvarf, a turning point. And what we have here are three different kvarfs. So I've got our own homely kvarf, kvarf, down at the bottom there. And we've got a kvarf in Greenland. And can you guess where the other kvarf is?
Faroe.
It looks like...
one on the left.
Yes, it looks like Faroe. It's a good guess.
Cape Wrath.
It's Cape Wrath, absolutely.
Oh, this one down here.
Yeah, Cape Wrath.
Formidable cliffs.
It is. And all these places make entirely, entire sense when you're thinking about sailing directions. So, while we know about our Kvarf here in Shetland, this is the place. If you're sailing up one side, you can get your boat, you can cross easily to the other side and go back down again.
I always thought what turning point
Yeah.
was for Kvarf. You think it's crossing
Yeah.
east to west.
Or
Turning.
the other way. Oh, yeah. West to east, east to west. Yes. Saves you a great big...
Yeah, wider on the top.
Aye. And...
So what you're saying, that is correct then, that they haul the boats across? That do you mean?
Well, there's that.
entirely possible, yeah. It would make sense. I know there's the story of the kind of bones being used as lins. Yeah.
It's a long way.
Yeah. Well, that's what the name means.
Smaller boats. Well, there's maybe not the bigger ones, but still, I don't know. It's a long piece.
But of course, if you want, you could have had two boats, one on either side. You could just walk across. But that's what the name means anyway. It's a.
Okay.
And Cape Wrath is Parav in Gaelic, which is a strange change from Kvarf to Parav, but it's the same word.
What's the one on the top of the mountains?
That's the south coast of Greenland. Now, the name hasn't survived in Greenland, has to be said, but it was called Kvarf in Old Norse. So if you're sailing west, till you hit the east coast of Greenland,
Hello.
went down. Hello! Hello there.
Hissy noise.
Yeah, so if you've joined us, that's great. Just remember to turn off your microphone again. Oh, excuse me, it's terrible. So if you're sailing to Greenland, you sail down the coast, and you turn, you sail back up again.
So it's Cape Farewell.
It is. Yeah. And, of course, Cape Wrath is that point along the coast, the north coast, where you turn and head into the Minch. We could do this for any number of names, but these are just, I've got one or two others, just to make the point. We're talking about a cultural community here that we shouldn't forget about. And here's another example. Leirvik. This lair is the same as in Leirau, the Old Norse word for Loire, as I mentioned before. And I mistranslated it myself. When you see Leirvik, it's clay bay. It's not really muddy bay, as some people make out. Leir is not the normal word for mud. It's a particular type of mud, clay, that you would use for... I don't know whether you'd use it, but you can see it on the bottom, and you might be able to use it for pots or something of that sort. But it's not just mud. And we have a couple of examples from other places here. In fact, I've got a map somewhere of Leirvik or Leirvicha or Leirvikur across the North Atlantic. There's a lot of them. It's a common name. The one on the right is Norway, and the one on the left is in the Faroe Islands. And there's several others in Norway as well. It's a common common one. Okay, so we just finish off on the place names. This is another map of the Bolstadder names, which we've already seen in a much more animated and exciting way on Google Earth, but this is from an older presentation. But you can see the distribution of names. Now, there's still the only sort of one-volume book on Scottish place names, which I would heartily recommend you get, which is Nicolaison's Scottish Place Names. You will see these maps, and he argued that this was the kind of definitive map of Norse Scotland. This was the map of the areas that were settled by the Norse. And he also had a map of Sether and of Stadder place names as well. But this is a map of Bolstadder. And he also had another map, which are Dalar place names in Scotland. Dale. And as you can see, that's far more distributed across the Scottish mainland. It's not just restricted, more or less, to the islands and the coast. And he argued that this was a map of Norse influence in Scotland. But there's been a bit of argument, which I've been involved in as well, about this. And I would argue that actually this is the map of Norse, more than Norse influence. This is Norse settlement. Because what Nicolaisen doesn't take into account to any great extent were the fact that the Vikings, when they first settled in a place, called that place after the main topographical feature in the landscape. And they liked to call places Dale, for example. And they also liked to call places after things like Vik, as the name for their settlement, not just for the fact that it's a bay. Thus, the first settlement in Iceland is Reykjavik. It's not Ingolf's farm or whatever, it's Reykjavik. So you get these, we have to look at topographical names used as settlements to get a wider view of the Norse impact in Scotland. And when you get a map like this, then you can really see that the Norse were widespread throughout the Highlands and the islands of Scotland. And particularly, of course, in Orkney and Shetland, they covered the landscape totally black with, I don't know why he's done that with Dale names, but anyway, that's what he did. And if you drop a map, actually, of modern settlements in Scotland that have Norse topographical names, you get a lot of them, and you get them up the coast and interior as well. So Malig, Giabik, Caradale, these are all farms, estates, settlements with Norse topographical names. And when you look at Iceland, you find that the biggest and oldest farms tend to have Norse topographical names. So we are doing ourselves, well, I don't know, that sounds a stupid thing to say, maybe we're doing the Norse a disservice by just imagining that is the extent of their settlement in Scotland. We're more likely to be on the right track with that one. That's not to say that all these names, of course, are settlement names, because you can have a topographical name that just refers to a place, but the fact that it's been preserved, and a lot of these are attached to estates, so it's more than just the topographical feature. It's a settlement, a landscape, a piece of owned landscape, if you like, that has the term. And if we didn't look at topographical names as settlement names, we'd miss out one area in particular where the Vikings, we know, were interested in and must have settled, and that's Kintyre. Kintyre doesn't have any Bolstadder names, but it does have a great number of topographical Norse names in it. And if there's no settlement, it's very hard to explain how these names would have been passed on. How do you pass on a name if there's nobody settled speaking that language? How do you pass it on to somebody else. You know, it doesn't really work.
Kintyre again, I'm sitting flat now.
Down here. See?
It's unreasonable to think it wasn't settled by Norse.
Yeah. Especially since we've got Isla, which we know was settled heavily with lots of Bolstadder names. We don't have any Bolstadder names in Kintyre, but we do know there are lots of Norse place names there. And they're associated with important landscape features that do have settlements and farms in them. That are called, like Caradale, for example, is a good example. And we know that the Norse liked Kintyre, because that's one of the places actually mentioned by Snorri Sturluson when he is talking about Magnus Bareleg's rampage through the Hebrides and his signing of an agreement with King Edgar of Scotland that all the islands around the coast of Scotland would become part of the Kingdom of Norway. This was in 1093. And King Magnus was in this, it doesn't exist anymore, but there's no reason to doubt that it existed at one time. In this treaty between Norway and Scotland, it was agreed that Magnus would be king over all the territories he could sail his boat around. So according to this, probably a folk tale, but nonetheless, he drew his boat across Tarbert at Kintyre and included Kintyre in his kingdom. Now, we're a wee bit out of the Viking Age at this point, but Magnus, in many ways, waged the last Viking raid in the British Isles. He was keen to have Kintyre, and Snorri said Kintyre was after the Isle of Man, the best land in the Hebrides. So it became part of his kingdom. And it probably became part of his kingdom because it was already settled by Norse-speaking people. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And in fact, if you want to do something really sort of... I suppose you could do that there as well. No good. Yeah, the only... If you go to Tarbert, between Knapdale and Kintyre, you will be standing on the only land border between Norway and Scotland that's existed in historical times. Useless fact there. Okay, so just to fill in the picture a little bit more, that's just we do have Norse names in Dumfries and Galloway as well. Not so many, but there are a few. And they seem to be connected to Norse names in Cumbria, so we get the same sort of names there. So they're probably a bit later than the names established in the Northern Isles, but they're Norse nonetheless. And again, it's just connected to the sea route. Okay, we're talking about Cumbria there. We don't need to bother with that. Okay, one last thing just to mention about place names. Place names can tell us something about the development of settlement in a place as well, because not all place names are made at the same time. Topographical names are probably made at the beginning, because if you don't know where you are, how are you going to find it again? How are you going to tell anybody you've been there? How are you going to claim that place? But over time, you've established your farm there. For example, say you take a land beside a bay and you call it Big Bay. So that's your farm. Then over the generations, as your farm develops, as it's split up in subsequent generations, you get new settlements built on the original large territory. And you can trace that in the place name record. And several scholars have tried this. I suppose I suppose you can prove it. I was going to say you couldn't prove it, but I don't see why not. This is Marwick's view of Orkney settlement names. And he suggested that the oldest names, say, if you go to an Orcadian parish, say, the oldest name might be a Bur, a Bur place name, or even a Scale or an Acher. These are the names in the arable heartland of a farming area. This, again, though, after the topographical name. Then as time goes on, the family splits up, farms split, people establish new settlements, and then you get Garther, Land, Bolstadder and Stadder place names. So they're secondary. They're not as old as the first ones. And then as time goes on yet again, you get the establishment of settlements on places that hadn't originally been farms. So Sether and Quoy, from Old Norse Kvi, originally a place where you kept your cattle. So you're seeing the population expand. And you can use this again with the two maps of Bolstadder and Dale. If Bolstadders are secondary, they show the development of settlement, the infilling of settlement, the increase in population. So a map of Bolstadders in Scotland is a map of where Norse settlement had developed and spread from an initial thing. And you find then what you're looking at is, if you go over the topographical names first, you might say you've got the initial settlement, and then when you get the Bolstadder names, you can see where Norse settlement developed and continued compared to places where it didn't, for other historical reasons. Okay, just show that again. So, yeah, so the suggestion is then this is where Norse settlement has continued to develop over the couple of generations. So you're seeing really embedded Norseness in these places. And as I said, you don't get any in somewhere like Kintyre. But you do get other Norse names there. So perhaps what's happening in Kintyre, and we'll take that as an example of other places too, you get initial Norse settlement, but it doesn't develop. Because, in this case, a possible explanation, which others have accepted for some strange reason, I put it forward, they've accepted it, so that's all right. The fact is that you also see a linguistic change in somewhere like Kintyre. So when the initial settlement takes place of the Norse, they establish their farms, but when the time comes for that settlement to have developed, which it would naturally, they're no longer speaking Norse when they're creating their secondary farms, and that's when you start to see Gaelic names of settlements taking place. So that's why Kintyre is different. When somewhere like Islay, just off the coast, you get this development taking place, and of course, in our areas here, you get a lot of them. Okay. So there's a lot more we could have said about place names. Is there any questions about place names? I'm wondering, but I'm thinking I'm going to show you something else in just now. But are there anything you would like to ask about place names? Because I know these are the kind of the things you come across every day. You see them, and you not that I can necessarily give you an etymology just off the top of my head, but.
I'll leave the question.
Can I just ask?
Yes.
Sorry.
Hello.
You were talking. Well, I lost you for about 10 minutes, I'm afraid. But
Oh, did you?
You were talking about Cape Wrath and the turning point. You said there's one in Shetland. I'm sorry, never having been to Shetland, I don't know where it is.
I'll show you. Here we go. Can you see that?
Thank you. Yep. Ooh.
There it's there.
Okay. Right.
So you'd be sailing up this way, or rowing like mad, and you could cross there and row over there. Or that way, or where?
Is this somewhere near Scalloway? I thought Scalloway was the
It is, yes.
point.
Yeah, it is. It is indeed. Hang on a second. Now let's see if we can do the magic of Google Earth. All right. There you go.
Okay. Yep.
That's it through there.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay. Right, we've still got some time. I think what I'll do is it was for last week as well, so read them yourself. The stories that exist in the Old Norse poems. The stuff is there. What I'd like to show you now, if we can find it, okay, is I know what it is. There's been a problem trying to. It does have all there. Okay, that's good. I was on another computer today and it didn't connect to my home drive for some strange reason, but this one is. So. Okay, just before I do that, I had a sabbatical last semester, which I didn't get as much time as I was supposed to get. Anyway, I did have a chance to do some exploration of some interesting sites. And I will show you this. This is the Came of Icebreaker on the mainland, near Federland.
Oh yes, of course.
It's a stack that is virtually impossible to get onto. I know because I've tried it several times. I have actually managed to get onto it from the sea. I jumped off a boat and swam across. But other than that, it's not possible. But the odd thing about this, and a number of other sites, is that it has structures on the top. And those structures are about, something down a bit. Uh, 10 by 5 metres. Rectangular structures, which are clearly Norse in origin. And they have been visited before in the past where it was suggested that they were monasteries, eremitical monasteries. But I hate my doots about that, I have to say, because these structures stand right on the top of the Kame and they dominate the Yelsund. They can be seen from the sea, totally unmissable. There we go. That's it. At the top there, you can just start to make out the grassy. And there's a retaining wall at the bottom. Anyone sailing past in the Viking Age would have seen this. It's there to make a statement. It's not hidden. It's sort of difficult to get to from the land, but it's only if you think from land-based ways would you think it's hidden. As soon as you get in the sea, it's the most obvious thing that you can imagine. And so anyway, I've been looking at these sites. There's a number of them. There's one, yes, in Colswick, exactly. That's an excellent one. I haven't been across to that yet, but the time will come. But on the other side of Yellsound, right, absolutely parallel, is the barrier of West Sandwich.
Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking of.
And I've been on that. Nearly killed myself going across, but I've been on it. So there's a kind of flat bit on the top, you see. Yeah. Now, there was another structure, something like this, but not as extreme, in Orkney, the Brochadiernes, which was also listed by Raymond Lamb as one of these possible eremitical monasteries. In fact, he was convinced that's what it was. Subsequent archaeological excavations at the Brochadiernes have shown it rather to be what James Barrett, who excavated it, has suggested is a chiefly centre. It's a stronghold for projecting power. So the most what was used as an example to say that the Came of Icebreaker was a monastery is now actually turned out to be a chiefly centre for projecting power. And this is what this seems to be as well. There we go. You see a little bit more. See the structures on the top there. There's it's difficult
Is there more than one?
it's difficult to count. There's about 20, and they're all kind of together.
So was
Yeah.
it inhabited? Or was it?
Must have been. Yep. So, there you go. So I've been doing a bit of work on these.
Hello. Can I just ask if you've been to the northernmost part of Saxavord? Two
Yes, I have, yes.
round cellular structures.
Ah, I didn't notice those. I've been up to the top and I had a good poke about. No, I haven't.
No,
I
you
didn't
have
notice
to
those.
keep going north from there.
Right.
And sort of go from the top of Saxavord. You don't go to the top of Saxavord. Keep going round the edge until you get to the northernmost edge of Saxavord.
Right.
And there's a couple of sort of round structures there, which I'm not really certain about.
I'll definitely have a look.
It's a very tricky place to get to
I'm sure it is. Well, so is this.
in the wind.
But
in the wind.
at Unst, talking about Unst, there's another structure, similar structure in Unst. The Blue Mole. At the southernmost point, the Blue Mole in Unst.
Sorry, is that Blue Mole Ness?
Yep, it
Right,
is.
because I lost you for a bit there. Yeah, Blue Mole Ness. Oh, yes.
And this also has similar rectangular structures on the top. And from this point, you can see right across Shetland, dominating the other main artery that goes through the middle. So you've got two of these structures on Hjälsund that goes right through the middle, and you've got this structure of the Blue Mole, which also you can see anything coming along the coast, the west coast of Unst, and you can see right across through the middle of Shetland to the other side to Skerries and Balsa and various other, Thekla anyway. There you go, you can see right down. And it also has these structures. So there's about 9 of them on this. So here we go. This is my drone, by the way.
Do you say there's 9 structures up there?
Well, it's difficult to... Possibly 9, yeah, maybe less, but it's a bit difficult. You have to get the right angle of the light. But there's some obvious ones, and then there's some less obvious ones. And there's also this big dike as well along the top. So we're about to see some of the structures now. In a minute. Well, there's one of them. You can see one in there. You start to see the others. And there's me. And then some more obvious ones coming. There's 1, 2, but there's the other ones further. 3. Maybe it's more like 7, I think. But there's others in the other direction. And then you come to the end of the headland here, and it drops away. And that's where the dike comes and blocks off the top.
So they're like lookouts or guard points, or difficult to say, is that?
Difficult to say, but they're strongholds, I think. They're projecting somebody's power. They're also... And this is also... And this is similar as well. It's on a flat bit on the top before it slopes away. There's the... Just a panoramic view.
Is it
Just
often similar in Norway? Kind of think correlation in Norway?
not quite the same. There are structures, though, that have sort of concentrations of settlement together. They're called ringtunes. So there are similar things. Yeah.
They're not associated with Papa names at all.
No.
No, there's no connection like that.
No, these are different. So there aren't. No, they're not on any Papa place or no. So interesting thing. So there are still things to be discovered about the Vikings in Orkney and Shetland. There are still settlements to be explored. There are still new things. I mean, really new. I mean, these are really new. These are not like anything else, really.
So are these things just on YouTube? Is that
Those are my YouTube thing. Yeah.
so you can search and see those things?
Yes, you can. But just there's another picture of some of the structures on the top of the Came of Icebester.
So what do we search under YouTube?
Good question. Hang on a sec. What is it? Well,
Andrew's name.
yeah, I'm putting on. I'll put a recording of this on as well. So, what is it actually? What I'm under? I forgot what I'm called. Wait a minute. Andrew Jennings. There you go.
Okay,
That's me. And I just wanted to show you the other. Well, there's me on the Game of Isbister, and the way I went up, and some of there's the boat. My boat, way over there. Similar sites that I've visited over time, because I think it's similar to peninsular sites along the coast, other parts of Scotland as well. It's just a very extreme version, similar to Brochadiernis.
So there might have been a historical precedent for these things going back
Yes.
to Mr. times.
Yeah, I mean
This is what you did.
it could be something borrowed from the Picts, because they did it. They liked to build fortified structures on headlands. Huge ones, in fact, some of them on the mainland. Dunnottar, for example, there's a Pictish settlement under that, and Burghead, huge one. But this was the most extreme site that I managed to get onto, which is the barrier of West Sandwich. So I went along that way and up there.
From the land.
From the land, yeah. Wasn't easy. That was that one. And that is directly opposite the Came. And you can see them. And the interesting thing about the barrier is that it maintains it's actually the Old Norse word Borgen. I don't know whether you ever watched Borgen on the telly with the Danish, the fort. And so that's what it is. It's the fort of West
How many
Sandwich.
structures on there? Is there more
Yes.
than one?
There's about, there's a good number, can't remember, but 7 of them. There's one.
We're going there with field studies walk, but we didn't go for it.
No, it's very dangerous.
I see there's quite a few there.
Remind me of what-
And there you go. Now that's come out really well. There's the Came of Isbister from the barrier.
Yes.
Look at the structures on the top there.
Oh, yeah.
Just looking across.
Yeah, that dominates Yalsund. So there you go. So there are, I think, Viking strongholds in Shetland. Oh, and I made a 3D thing as well.
You got a license.
See how you get this. We better finish, I guess.
No, we're interested, you see. Keep us here all night with us.
What's it
We
doing?
get lots of
Come on,
emails to
then.
do,
Power
don't we?
gets cut off.
Yeah, we'll have to. What's it doing? Well, maybe it's not going to. It's not going to work on this one. It's not going to work on. But I've got a 3D thing that also shows the structures on the top.
That's very
Yeah.
good there, yeah.
What we have is, I think, a set of Viking age strongholds in Shetland, dominating the sea routes
They've
through.
not been excavated.
They've not been. Well, not really. No, that there was a very brief, quick visit to that site, but not really.
Not
No.
on any great
No.
extent. So I wonder if they'd find them there.
Oh yes, they would definitely.
Artifacts.
So there's one of the.
Approached by helicopter.
Or drone.
Drone, landed drone.
So, folks, thank you very much, and go out and find Viking stuff, and I hope you've enjoyed that.
Very much so.
And who knows, might do another one in the future. So, farewell, folks.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank
now.
you.
Bye.
And I'm going to put a recording of this on so you can see it again on YouTube. See yourselves in all your glory. So, all the best now.
Thank you.
Yes, bye. Pretty good.
Bye-bye, Whitney.
Bye.
Don't know if you can see me. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we can see you. Yeah.
Oh, can you? Oh.
Good night.